Hi there, this is John for killerphp.com, and today what I'm going to be doing is looking at JSON and really introducing JSON, which is the JavaScript object notation, which is really just a notation format that can accomplish everything that you can accomplish with XML. JSON is also lighter and is also jQuery friendly. So as things progress with being able to do XPath queries in XML and being able to query XML, JSON is a great alternative because it's light and it's quick and it's easy to use, and it's also very malleable, and it's great for serializing objects and passing them from PHP to your jQuery front end. So let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clear out a lot of what we did in the last tutorial, but we're going to be coming back to it in the next tutorial. So don't just delete it completely, but I am going to be going back to a very simple introduction. So we're going to have a title here. We'll say introduction or introducing JSON. Very simple. Have a title. That's about it. And I'm just going to save this file as introducing JSON.html. So I'm going to go back here and I'll say introducing JSON. And there we go. So we've got ourselves a nice website with a header 1 tag. Now the nice thing about JSON is that it works much like an object would work in something like Java. So I'm just going to give you a very quick example of what the JSON notation looks like, and then we're going to start playing with it using a template and also just logging against it as well. So at the top here, and this has nothing to do with jQuery specifically, just so you know, I'm going to create a variable called person, and it's going to be equal to 2 curly braces. Now the 2 curly braces act as a container format. So inside person here, I'm going to create my first parameter, which will be ID. And ID will be an integer of type 13. Now I'm going to create a comma because this is actually comma delimited list. And I'm going to create a parameter called first name, and that's going to have a parameter of Jane, and last name, which is going to have a value of Doe. So I think you can see here that I've got this person object with an ID of 13, first name and a last name, and that's it. Now if I go back here to my Google set on load callback, basically my get ready function, I'm going to create a console.log of person.id and person.fname, and then person.lastname, and then we're just going to close that. So we're doing a bit of concatenation, and we're just doing a console.log, and the notation is quite nice. You can see that we're just saying person.id, person.fname, person.lname. So it's very descriptive as well. Now if I refresh this again, you're not going to see anything, but if I open up Firebug, you'll see that it says 13 Jane Doe. So we can see that the notation works well and that our variable up there is also working. I can also, this is kind of a side note, but just like I'm using a dot notation, I can also use an associative array notation as well, although it does take up more characters and there isn't much of a benefit, but it's just something that's good to know. So if I refresh this again, you'll see that the associative array notation also functions with JSON. So let's go back to our JSON object here, and let's add a couple neat new features. So our friend Jane Doe here actually has multiple email addresses. So one way of accomplishing that is just to use an array within our JSON object. So we're going to have a parameter called email, and then inside that I'm going to have an array with jdoe@company.com and then jdoe@gmail.com. So that's her personal and her work email. So you can see that we've embedded a associative, not even an associative array, just a regular array within the email variable. We can take that a step further, and we can create objects. So I'm going to create a permissions object. And the permissions object simply tells us what permissions Jane Doe has on the system. So again, we're going to separate this with a colon, and then we're going to open this up into another squiggly bracket. And I'm just going to indent that a bit so that we know that that's different. And then here we're going to have a parameter called guest. She is truly a guest in our system. A user. She is definitely a user. But let's say that for some reason or another she's not an administrator in our system. So we now have an object within an object. We've got a person object and then a permissions object. We've got an array of email addresses. We've got some strings, and then we have an integer here, which is an ID, and we also have booleans, which is kind of neat. So if I go back down to my Google callback here, I can do console.log person.id. I can do person.fname, and I can also do something like person.email and person.permissions.admin. Let's see what happens. So if I refresh this again, I'm going to get 13 Jane, Doe, basically the array for her 2 email addresses, and then false. So JSON is very powerful because it allows you to create these really complex objects very quickly. So we'll just leave this logging stuff in there for now, but we're going to create a function, and this function is going to be called getPersonTemplate, and it will take a variable called p. And in here I'm going to create a variable called o, and it'll just be a div of class type person. Just close that, and then at the bottom here I'm going to have o plus closing div, and then I'm going to return o. Wait, we need to do a plus equals, I believe. There we go. So just doing a bit of string concatenation. Now inside this div I want to have some kind of header 2. So instead of just doing a semicolon here, I'm going to do we're going to use the plus for concatenation. So plus header 2 plus p.fname plus p.lname, and then close our header 2 plus p, well, let's make this small, id plus p.id. So what you can see that I'm doing right now is I'm basically just creating a template inside my JavaScript. Now we've got this emails tag right here, which I'm going to put together a little separately. So in order to do the emails tag, I'm going to create a unordered list. So this way we can accommodate any number of emails. So that's our first chunk. Now we've got this unordered list up here. We're going to have to close it somewhere. So I'm just going to create another concatenation here to close the unordered list. And now we're going to start looping. So I'm going to create a for loop with a variable of type I is less than p.email.length. In other words, we're going to do a count on the length of our email array, I++, and then we will concatenate this with any kind of list item, and in here p.email, and then we can grab the indice of that email and then close that list item. And then lastly, we need to be looking at our permissions. So here I am just going to create a header 3. And if you can think about this and combine it with what we did in the DOM manipulation tutorial, you could add any number of listeners or what have you to your already existing JavaScript, and you could come up with some really great and creative options. So this list of permissions is going to be a little different. We're going to just do a check. So we're going to say, well, first, if we're opening up our unordered list, we need to close it again. So I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to say if p.permissions.admin, in other words, if you're an admin, then I'm going to concatenate this with a list item of type admin, or not of type, but just with the admin property. And we're going to do this a couple of times. We'll do this for p.admin, p.user, and p.guest. You can also see that order does not matter here. So that even though up here I've got guest, user, and admin, because they're properties of my object, I can access them in any order. And then I close that, and then I return the O. So now I should be able to do console.log get person template and put in the person object. We can delete this stuff over here. Refresh this. Let's see what happens. Okay, I'm getting an error. Oh, I forgot my bracket at the end. Save that, refresh it again, and it looks like we're getting ourselves a nice bit of HTML code. Now we'll just combine this with what we've done in previous tutorials by adding a content section, then a paragraph, and a hyperlink. This time it's going to be an ID of get TPL, get person template. My creativity is escaping me. So we've got get TPL, and then up here in our Google callback, we're just going to do get TPL dot click function return false. And then here we just want to append to our content section get person template with the person object. And I'm going to get rid of the log, refresh this again, and you can see that Jane Doe shows up with an ID of 13, emails, she's got her 2 email addresses, and then the permissions she has on the system. I don't know how to spell permissions, so we should change that. Okay. And let's say down the line she becomes an administrator. I just specify that to true. And if I run this again, you can see that now she is an admin on the system as well, which is kind of neat. So what we're doing here is we're basically separating content from style and style from behavior. And that's very important because as projects get more and more complex, you want to separate your data from the behavior associated with that data. And you want to separate the behavior, the clicks, the fades, and all that fun stuff from the visual and the aesthetic part of the site and the design. In larger projects, you might have an interaction designer, you might have a web designer, you might have a systems or a software architect, and they're all kind of concerned with different things, where an interaction designer would be concerned with the animation and the user interaction and the snappiness of a website. The web designer would be more concerned with the color, the branding, the markup, and the overall style guide. And the systems architect or the software architect would be more concerned with the data and the system security and all the functional requirements of a system. So by thinking in these terms, you can actually delegate out bits and pieces of a project very easily and quickly. So in the last little tutorial chunk, we're going to be looking at how we can take this and incorporate PHP into this project so that we have essentially dynamic data. Thanks for listening.